Welcome to the Human Archive. If you enjoy original science fiction stories about humanity finding its place among the stars, subscribe and join us for the next one. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Hierarchy. Kolvath Dume knew exactly where the human belonged, near the bottom. That was not cruelty, it was anatomy. Greyhook Detention Station held prisoners from 23 recognized species. Some were small enough that Kolvath could have lifted them with one arm. Others possessed claws, venom spines, crushing jaws, hardened dermal plates, or muscles designed for heavier gravity. The human had none of those things. Beside Kolvath, the newcomer looked unfinished. Kolvath was Sarkin, born to a heavy-gravity species whose bodies had been shaped by large predators and hard labor. His shoulders nearly filled a standard cell door, and his forearms were thick enough that Greyhook's medical scanner had once recalibrated because it assumed two prisoners were standing too close together. Kolvath had spent his life in places where strength was easy to read. You could see who could lift, who could fight, and who others made room for. Prison made that hierarchy cruder, not stranger. He did not boast about his strength because everyone in Block 7 already knew what he could do. The human arrived during second meal. New prisoners learned Greyhook quickly during meals. There was enough food. There was not enough patience. The station's automated dispensers allocated nutrition according to species and medical profile. In theory, every inmate received exactly what they required. In practice, 400 prisoners tried to reach 12 serving points during the same 90-minute window. The largest bodies arrived first. The smallest learned to wait. The human did not know that yet. He joined a line near dispenser 4. Kolvath watched from a bench while eating. The human carried himself strangely. He was neither timid nor aggressive, but alert, and his eyes moved constantly across doors, guards, cameras, serving lines, and the people standing near one another. Kolvath had seen that behavior before in predators assessing territory. The resemblance ended when Vorek pushed him. Vorek was a Barish dockworker with a torso like a storage drum and two heavy upper limbs built for lifting freight. He wanted the human's place. The human looked at him. Vorek pointed toward the end of the line. The human said something in trade speech. "I'm here." Vorek pushed him again, harder. The human caught his balance. Several prisoners turned to watch. Kolvath stopped eating. This was the first test. The human glanced toward the guards. They had seen it. They did not move. Greyhook guards intervened in serious violence. They did not arbitrate every shove in a meal line. The human looked back at Vorek. Then he made what Kolvath considered a mistake. He resisted, though not well. Vorek grabbed his shirt, turned, and threw him sideways. The human hit the edge of a bench with his hip and shoulder, then went down. A few prisoners laughed. Kolvath did not. The human lay still for perhaps 2 seconds, then pushed himself upright. Blood ran from his nose. Vorek had already taken his place. Kolvath expected rage. Threats. Perhaps an attack from behind. Instead, the human checked his nose with 2 fingers, looked at the blood, retrieved his tray from where it had fallen, and walked to the end of the line. That was strange enough that Kolvath followed him after the meal. The human was sitting against the wall beneath one of the ventilation grates, eating slowly. Kolvath stopped in front of him. The human looked up. "What?" His trade speech was good. Kolvath folded his arms. Kolvath told him, "You challenged Vorek." The human frowned and replied that he had only stood in line. When Kolvath pointed out that he had resisted and been thrown into a bench for it, the human's answer was maddeningly matter-of-fact. "I noticed." Kolvath's mouth plates shifted. "Then why did you not attack again?" The human dabbed his nose with a cloth. "Because he'd win again." Kolvath stared. The human continued eating. There was no shame in his voice, no anger either, just assessment. Kolvath lowered himself against the wall opposite him and asked his name. "Nkem Ibarra." Kolvath gave his own. Nkem said, "I know." That surprised him enough to ask how. Nkem pointed vaguely toward the meal hall. "Everybody gets out of your way." Kolvath glanced behind himself. "That tells you my name." "No, the guy at the water station said, 'Move, Kolvath's coming.'" Kolvath considered. "Your observation was therefore not impressive." "Nope." The human ate another bite. Kolvath should have left. Instead of leaving, Kolvath asked why Nkem was in Greyhook. The human said it was a wartime exclusion violation. His cargo route had crossed a military boundary while carrying medical supplies. Kolvath waited for a claim of righteousness, but Nkem merely said his hearing was pending. When Kolvath asked whether he expected release, Nkem replied, "I believe courts enjoy taking their time." That sounded universal. Kolvath stood. He looked down at the human. "If Vorek takes your place tomorrow, do not resist." Nkem wiped his nose again. "I'm going to fix that." Kolvath paused. "Fix Vorek." "The line?" Kolvath laughed. Then he walked away. The human had been in Greyhook for less than 6 hours. He had already misunderstood prison. That was what Kolvath believed. Later, he would wonder whether Nkem had understood it faster than anyone else. Chapter 2. Lunch. The next meal began with Nkem asking Kolvath whether he enjoyed eating last. They stood near the sleeping bays while prisoners moved toward the serving hall. Kolvath stared at him. Nkem asked, "You always wait." Kolvath denied it, but the human pointed out that he was waiting now. Looking toward the serving crush, Kolvath had to admit the observation was technically correct. He generally delayed his own meal because he disliked the crush around the dispensers. Food remained available for him regardless. Nobody stole from Kolvath. "I eat when I choose." Right, which is usually after the stupid part. Kolvath did not know what that meant. Nkem gestured toward the serving hall. Everybody piles in at once. Big people get food first. Smaller people either fight for space or wait. Half the time somebody grabs the wrong ration package because they can't read the species marking. Then the dispenser area jams up and everybody gets mad. Kolvath looked at him. Kolvath reminded him that he had been in Greyhook for 1 day and asked whether he believed he already understood the prison. "No," Nkem said. "I understand lines." Cargo work, he explained, meant living inside manifests, queues, handoffs, and delays. A bad line was just a bottleneck with people in it. He pointed out that Block 7 had 4 sleeping sections and proposed rotating meal order by section. Kolvath said no one would follow it. Nkem agreed that they probably would not, at least not at first. "Then why suggest it?" Kolvath asked. "Because they might if you do." For a moment neither spoke. Kolvath stared at the human and Nkem stared back. Kolvath narrowed his eyes. "You want me to enforce your line?" Nkem said no. Kolvath asked whether he was supposed to threaten anyone who refused. Again Nkem said no. "Then what do you want?" Kolvath demanded. Nkem's answer was simple. "I want you to eat when your section is called." Kolvath almost laughed at the idea that prisoners might organize themselves simply because he stood in a different place. "I think people watch what the biggest guy does." Kolvath considered hitting him, not seriously, just enough to correct the tone. Instead he asked, "Why should I help you?" Nkem shrugged. "Because you hate standing in that mess." Kolvath did hate it. Nkem knew that annoyed him more. The human had already spoken with several prisoners, a eunuch translator, 2 food handlers. A quiet elderly Feroz inmate who knew which sleeping sections contained the largest number of medically restricted diets. Nkem had also somehow convinced one of the guards to let him borrow a grease marker. He wrote 4 symbols on a wall panel beside the serving entrance. He marked sections A through D and added arrows. The first meal under the new system was chaos. Half the prisoners ignored the markings. One argued that his species required earlier feeding. Another insisted the rotation favored the rear bays. Vorik walked directly to the front. Nkem did not challenge him. Kolvath did not either. Nkem simply asked the food handlers not to pass Vorik a ration until his section's turn. The handlers laughed. Then, after seeing Kolvath standing calmly with Section C instead of forcing his way forward, one agreed. Then another. Vorik reached the dispenser. His ration did not appear. Vorik slammed one hand against the barrier and demanded to be served. The handler pointed toward the rotation board and reminded him that Section B was not up yet. Vorik objected that he was already standing there. "So is everyone," the handler replied. Vorik looked toward Kolvath, but Kolvath did nothing. That was the important part. Vorik cursed and stepped aside. The next prisoner was served. The room became quieter. It was not peaceful. Greyhook was never peaceful, but it was different. By the 4th meal, most prisoners followed the rotation because fighting the system took longer than using it. The serving crush eased. Smaller prisoners stopped waiting until the final minutes. Incorrect ration exchanges decreased because volunteers had time to check species markings before food left the dispenser area. Kolvath noticed something else. There was still enough food. There had always been enough food. The problem had never been food, it had been access. Nkem stood beside the serving entrance on the 5th day, watching the flow. Kolvath approached. Later, Kolvath accused Nkem of manipulating him. Nkem replied that he had only asked Kolvath to stand in line. Kolvath pointed out that the human had known others would copy him. "I hoped," Nkem said. When Kolvath called that manipulation, Nkem accepted the charge without concern. He even asked whether Kolvath planned to throw him into another bench. Kolvath said he could. Nkem shrugged. "You could do that whether I admit things or not." Kolvath disliked that answer because it was true. He looked toward the prisoners moving through the meal hall. Kolvath asked why the new system had worked. Nkem seemed puzzled by the question. "Because everybody gets something from it." Kolvath objected that Vorik did not. The old bully had lost the privilege of eating first. Nkem watched Vorik collect his ration in proper order. "He still gets fed," he said. I guess he has to decide whether status tastes better than dinner. Kolvath made a low clicking sound. Humor, the human looked at him. That a laugh? No. Sure. Kolvath walked away. That evening he found himself checking which section ate first the following day. He did not know when he had started caring. Chapter 3. Words. The first serious fight Nkem prevented began because a Tulloch prisoner thought a Ravan had poisoned his food. The Ravan had not. He had apologized. Unfortunately, the Tulloch did not know that. The Ravan spoke no trade language. The Tulloch knew perhaps 12 words. Their species communicated through different vocal ranges, and the prison translator network only covered official interactions, not ordinary prisoner conversation. By the time Kolvath reached the meal hall, the Tulloch had overturned a bench. The Ravan had raised both defensive limbs. Several prisoners were moving closer. Nkem stepped between them. This was stupid. Kolvath grabbed the back of Nkem's shirt and hauled him out of striking range. The human twisted and told him to put him down. Kolvath reminded him that he had stepped between two angry prisoners, one of whom possessed cutting spurs. Nkem said he had noticed both facts. Kolvath set him down only after realizing the human was not planning to fight, and Nkem immediately pointed to a Seleni inmate near the water station. "You speak Ravan?" the prisoner said a little, and Nkem waved him over. "Then get over here." The Seleni translated. The problem took less than a minute to explain. The Ravan had picked up the wrong ration package, recognized the mistake, returned it, and then attempted to apologize. The Tulloch interpreted the gesture as a threat. The fight disappeared almost instantly. The Tulloch backed away, embarrassed. The Ravan lowered his spurs. Nkem stared at both, then looked around the room. How many times does this happen? Kolvath knew the answer. Too often. By evening, Nkem had found another wall. The prison regulations allowed inmates to write within designated recreation areas using erasable markers. Nkem used all of them. He started with simple phrases: "I need medical help and this food is unsafe for me." Other entries followed: "I am looking for someone, that bed is occupied, I did not take it, water problem, and guard." Prisoners laughed at first. Then they added translations. One language appeared, then another. Some could not be represented easily with human phonetics, so prisoners added symbols. They added gesture instructions, color marks, and pronunciation approximations. A Jeshan prisoner drew a small diagram showing how their species indicated apology by lowering the left shoulder membrane. Several species added equivalents. Within a week, pieces of copied phrase cards appeared throughout Block 7. Kolvath found one tucked beside his bunk. He held it up. Nkem. Nkem was sitting on the floor with 3 prisoners arguing over pronunciation when Kolvath held up the card beside his bunk. Nkem looked over and asked what was wrong. "What is this?" Kolvath demanded. Nkem identified it as a phrase card, which was not the answer Kolvath wanted. When Kolvath asked why it was beside his bed, Nkem suggested that somebody thought he needed vocabulary. Kolvath reminded him that he spoke trade language. "Congratulations," Nkem said, and went back to the others. Kolvath stared after him. Later that night, a small Oracy prisoner approached. Its trade speech was nearly incomprehensible, so it held up a card, pointed to "I am looking for someone," and showed Kolvath a name. Kolvath recognized it as a prisoner transferred to Block 9 3 days earlier. He pointed toward the correct phrase on the card, then toward the block transfer notice board. The Oracy understood. It made a gesture of gratitude and hurried away. Kolvath looked down at the card. The human had not taught everyone the same language. He had made it possible to function without one. That was different. Chapter 4. Not a doctor. The sick prisoner was named Pelrith. Kolvath knew him only because he slept 3 bays away and was always cold. His species came from a humid world. Greyhook's standard temperature was unpleasant for him, but safe. Then he stopped eating. At first no one cared. Prisoners skipped meals for many reasons, including protest, illness, depression, trade, and fear. By the second day, Pelrith was weak enough that he had trouble standing. Someone brought him to Nkem, and the human looked horrified. "Why are you bringing him to me?" Nkem asked. When the others said it was because he fixed things, he protested that he fixed lunch, not people, and told them to take Pelrith to medical. They explained that Pelrith had already gone and been sent back with hydration tablets. Nkem crouched and asked what hurt, but Pelrith did not understand him. Nkem used the phrase card to ask about medical problems, pain, and food. Pelrith reacted strongly to the food symbol. Nkem found one translator, then another, until eventually they understood. Pelrith had an individual dietary intolerance, not one shared by his entire species. The station ration database listed his species as compatible with a common protein stabilizer. Pelrith was not. He had tried to explain it during intake. Nobody shared enough vocabulary. Medical had seen nausea and weakness. They had not seen the cause. Nkem took the information to a guard. The guard refused to act on prisoner diagnosis. Nkem nodded. Good. That confused everyone. Then Nkem asked for a medical interpreter. The guard could authorize that. An hour later, Pelrith was back in the clinic. Medical identified the reaction, gave medication, and corrected his diet profile. He returned the next day looking less like a corpse. After that, prisoners started bringing sick people to Nkem. The humans stopped it by standing on a bench during evening recreation. Kolvath watched. Nkem raised his voice. I am not a doctor. Several prisoners shouted complaints. Nkem pointed toward the phrase wall. If you're sick, medical handles sick. If medical can't understand you, we find somebody who can explain. Stop bringing me infected wounds. I don't know what your blood is supposed to look like. That got laughter. Nkem continued. What we need is a list of people who can translate medical words. The laughter faded. Within 2 days, there was one. It was not a list of illnesses or diagnoses. It was a language registry showing who could explain symptoms, who understood anatomical terms, and who knew which species required special handling. A Veshir former nurse volunteered to help people prepare information before clinic visits. Medical staff noticed. Appointments got shorter. Fewer prisoners returned repeatedly with the same unresolved problem. Kolvath later told Nkem that he had found the answer to Pelrith's illness. Nkem rejected the credit. Pelrith had known the food was making him sick. The problem was that he could not tell anyone. Kolvath insisted that Nkem had connected him to someone who could. That's different, Nkem said. Kolvath studied him. You say that often, because it's often different. Kolvath did not understand why the distinction mattered so much. He would later. Chapter 5. The book. The notebook began as contraband. Technically, Greyhook permitted prisoners access to approved writing material. It did not permit them to maintain private institutional records containing information about other inmates. Nkem did not know that when he began, or claimed not to. Kolvath suspected otherwise. The first version was a stack of folded paper tied together with meal wrapper fiber. On the front, Nkem wrote, useful stuff. Kolvath found this insulting to written language. Inside were names, languages, work skills, medical communication needs, transferred prisoners, empty bunks, family connections across blocks, and notes on who could repair plumbing, understand electrical systems, or work with food machinery. Nkem had even recorded which guards responded well to clear requests and which ones hated being interrupted during shift turnover. After reading 3 pages, Kolvath looked at Nkem and called it an intelligence file. Nkem insisted it was a notebook. Kolvath pointed out that it recorded guard behavior. Nkem countered that it merely recorded when not to annoy them. That is intelligence, Kolvath said. Nkem conceded the phrase useful intelligence. Kolvath warned that he could be punished for keeping it. Nkem considered that, then said, probably. Asked why he maintained it anyway, he answered, because people keep asking me the same questions. Kolvath flipped pages. Kolvath tested him. He asked who Thesor was, and Nkem answered that she was in Block 9 and spoke 6 languages. Varn Kell had worked station plumbing before the war. Jorinex had a brother in Block 11. Kolvath closed the notebook and asked whether Nkem actually knew all those people. No. Then how did he know these things? Nkem took the notebook back. Other people know them, that is the point. Soon other prisoners began writing in it. Then Greyhook confiscated it. Superintendent Ashara Bex herself came to Block 7. Kolvath had seen her before. She was tall by Vesari standards, with copper-colored facial markings and 4 narrow arms. She was not physically intimidating. She did not need to be. Everyone knew she controlled the doors. Bex held Nkem's notebook between 2 fingers and addressed him formally as Mr. Ibarra. Nkem stepped forward and answered, yes, Superintendent. She said the notebook contained records concerning hundreds of prisoners. Nkem automatically corrected her, not hundreds, then stopped when she looked at him. Nkem apologized for correcting the superintendent's prisoner count. Bex then asked why he was tracking medical restrictions. Nkem clarified that he was not recording diagnoses, only who needed a translator for medical visits. She asked why he tracked work skills. Because things break. When Bex reminded him that this was a prison, he answered, things break here too. Her next concern was the apparent record of guard schedules, which Nkem insisted was not actually a schedule at all. Nkem explained. When we need something, some times are better than others. Shift change is bad. Meal count is bad. If we wait 15 minutes, people get answers faster. You have optimized requests to my staff. Yes, Bex looked as though she regretted asking. She turned to Kolvath. Do you follow this man's instructions? Kolvath considered the human beside him. No, Nkem looked at him. Kolvath continued. I follow the meal rotation. Bex's eyes narrowed. Bex turned to Kolvath and asked about the translation system, the medical referrals, and the work registry. Kolvath answered each one the same way, useful. By the third answer, even he could hear what he was admitting. Bex looked back at Nkem. Bex asked whether Nkem was in charge of Block 7. He scratched one eyebrow and said no. When she asked who was, he glanced around the room before answering, depends what broke. Bex stared at him for several seconds, then handed back the notebook. Keep medical details out of it. No diagnoses, no confidential records. Skill listings may remain voluntary. Any information about staff schedules is removed. Nkem nodded. Fair, and I want a copy of the language registry. That surprised everyone. Bex turned to leave. As Bex turned to leave, Nkem called after her and asked whether the block could have actual binders. Kolvath closed his eyes. Bex slowly turned and asked what he needed them for. Nkem held up the tied stack of paper. This thing is falling apart. She looked from the improvised notebook to Nkem. 2 days later, Block 7 received 3 approved binders. The front label no longer said useful stuff. Kolvath missed it. Chapter 6. Judges get chairs. The stolen ration almost caused a war between sleeping sections. Vorek's food packet disappeared. That alone would not normally matter. Vorek had enemies. The problem was where the ration appeared, under the bunk of a young Marathi prisoner named Sale. Sale belonged to Section D, Vorek belonged to Section B. By the time Kolvath heard the shouting, 30 prisoners had gathered. Vorek wanted Sale punished. Sale denied taking anything, and when Vorek shoved him, Kolvath stepped forward. When Nkem caught Kolvath's forearm and told him to wait, Kolvath reminded him that Vorek might injure Sale. Nkem's answer was not to ignore the threat but to use Kolvath differently. Then stand close. Kolvath did, which was becoming a pattern. Nkem stepped into the center. Who found the ration? Vorek pointed at a Barash prisoner. Where exactly? The Barash showed him. Who saw Sale take it? No one, Vorek growled. It was under his bed. Nkem nodded. Yeah, that's bad. Sale shouted something in Marathi. A translator answered. He says he didn't take it. Vorek moved forward. Kolvath moved between them. Nkem continued. Nkem asked whether anyone had seen the ration before the second meal rotation. A Firo's prisoner had seen it on the distribution cart. 3 prisoners had unloaded that cart, and one remembered a packet falling. Another had picked it up, mistaken the marker strip for Section D, and placed it with the wrong group. Sale had never touched it. The entire argument collapsed, leaving Vorek staring first at the food and then at Sale with nowhere useful for his anger to go. Sale demanded an apology. Vorek refused, and Nkem sighed. Nkem proposed restitution instead of a fight. Vorek could give Sale one of his dessert portions the next day. Vorek objected that he had already admitted he was wrong, while Sale objected that an admission was not enough. Nkem looked at both of them and said they were free to fight over it if they preferred, then told Kolvath to move. Kolvath asked whether he truly intended to allow that. No, Nkem said. I want them to realize how stupid that sounds. The dessert portion was agreed upon. Later, someone called Nkem a judge. He rejected the title immediately. The prisoner laughed and pointed out that Nkem settled disputes. Nkem replied that judges got chairs. Kolvath noted that Nkem was sitting on a bench, but the human insisted a bench was not a chair. Kolvath accused him of avoiding the point, and Nkem cheerfully admitted that he was. Not every dispute, not everyone trusted the process. Some fights still happened. Greyhook remained a prison, but where facts existed, Nkem asked for them. Where restitution made sense, he proposed it. Where the prison had an official rule, he used it. Where no rule existed, he tried to find an agreement everyone could survive. Kolvath found himself attending more often, mostly because if someone became violent, his presence helped. At first, then something changed. Vorek broke the meal rotation again. He walked to the front. No one served him, not because Kolvath threatened anyone. The food handlers simply continued with the correct section. Vorek argued. Prisoners behind him told him to move. He turned toward Kolvath. Kolvath folded his arms. Vorek looked toward Nkem. The human was not even there. Slowly, Vorek stepped out of line. Kolvath felt something shift. The first meal rotation had worked because he participated. This one worked without him. That should have pleased him. Instead, it unsettled him. Strength was simple. You knew where it lived. This was beginning to live everywhere. Chapter 7. The Distribution Meeting. Block 7 was not enough. Nkem discovered that during work detail. Greyhook assigned mixed block crews to basic station maintenance, cargo handling, recycling, cleaning, and food preparation. Nkem spent 3 days moving sealed supply containers between storage decks. By the 4th, he had learned that Block 9's medical interpreter list was better than 7's. By the 5th, Block 11 had copied the meal rotation. By the 6th, 3 blocks were exchanging prisoner transfer information. The first cross-block meeting took place beside a laundry folding station because Nkem asked Kolvath to attend. Kolvath assumed the human wanted protection, but Nkem said no. He wanted Kolvath because Kolvath knew Block 5's Sarkin representative. Kolvath pointed out that the representative disliked Nkem despite never having met him. Exactly, Nkem said. That seems efficient. Kolvath did not understand, but he went anyway. Representatives from 6 blocks gathered. They were not elected, at least not yet. They were simply people who knew things. A translator, 2 food workers, a medical advocate, a former station mechanic, Kolvath and Nkem. They discussed missing prisoners and diet errors. One block had a water dispenser that failed every 3rd cycle. Another had a prisoner who could translate for a rare species nobody else understood. Someone proposed meeting again. Nkem immediately objected when someone called the gathering a council. Kolvath asked why. Councils sounded political, Nkem said. Kolvath pointed out that they had discussed medicine, water, and translation, all of which sounded political to him. Nkem relabeled each problem as distribution of medicine, distribution of water, distribution of words. Kolvath called that dishonest. Nkem called it boring. When Kolvath asked why boring was useful, Nkem answered, because boring things scare administrators less. The distribution meeting continued. Superintendent Bex noticed within 2 weeks. She summoned Nkem again. This time Kolvath accompanied him because Block 7 had informally decided that no one went alone to administrative questioning if another prisoner could serve as witness. Bex disliked that rule but tolerated it. In her small office, Nkem sat while Kolvath remained standing. Bex said cross-block gatherings had increased and reminded Nkem that he had been warned against creating an alternative authority structure. Nkem insisted it was not an authority structure. When she asked what it was, his answer was simply distribution. Bex closed her eyes briefly. Kolvath almost admired her restraint. Then she opened a report. Bex reviewed the results. Assaults in Blocks 7, 9, and 11 had decreased, medical no-show rates had fallen, meal disruptions were down, and work attendance had improved. Nkem listened until she finished, then asked whether any of that was bad. Bex said it was not. Her problem was that she did not know who controlled the growing system. Nkem seemed genuinely confused by the premise. Systems required accountability, Bex told him. On that point he agreed, but his answer was distributed. Food representatives were accountable for meal rotation, medical advocates for translation, work crews for technical problems they could safely handle, and guards where prisoner authority ended. Bex stopped him before the list became longer. Kolvath was not sure she understood. He was not sure he did either. Bex looked toward Kolvath and asked where Ibarra fit into that arrangement. Kolvath answered before Nkem could. He knows who to ask. The superintendent's gaze sharpened. That was the first time Kolvath realized what Nkem's role had become. He did not do most things. He connected things. Bex understood that before Kolvath fully did, and the realization made her more cautious and unexpectedly more interested. Chapter 8. Same rules. Nkem's enemy finally attacked him in the laundry corridor. His name was Dras Orville. He was not evil. Kolvath knew him. Dras had once controlled access to extra meal portions through intimidation and favors. The new rotation had destroyed that leverage. The medical advocate system reduced his ability to charge prisoners for translation. The work skill registry meant people no longer needed his permission to find someone who could repair things. Nkem had not targeted Dras. That made it worse. The human had dismantled his influence without acknowledging it existed. Dras waited until Nkem was alone, almost alone. Kolvath was one corridor away. He heard the impact, then another. By the time he arrived, Nkem was on the floor. Dras kicked him once in the ribs. Kolvath crossed the distance. Dras saw him and stopped. Kolvath could have broken him quickly, and everyone in the corridor knew it. Kolvath grabbed him by the front of his uniform and lifted until Dras's feet left the floor. Nkem, Kolvath said. The human coughed. Blood ran from his mouth. One eye was already swelling. What should I do? Nkem stared at Dras hanging in Kolvath's grip. For a moment, pain, anger, and fear crossed the human's face. Good. Kolvath wanted him human enough to want revenge. Then Nkem, bloodied and hurting, told Kolvath to put Dras down. Kolvath reminded him that Dras had assaulted him and ignored every rule Nkem had spent months building. Nkem agreed with the facts, but not the conclusion. He wanted witnesses, a medical report, and the same disciplinary process used for everyone else. Kolvath called that insufficient. Probably, Nkem admitted. Kolvath lowered Dras and said, "But it is what you built." Nkem looked at him. "Yes." Dras landed on his feet. Guards arrived, separated everyone, and sent Nkem to medical while statements were collected and security footage reviewed. Dras lost recreation privileges, was reassigned from preferred work detail, and received formal disciplinary marks that would affect his tribunal review. No one was beaten, and Kolvath hated that outcome for 3 days. 3 days later, when Nkem returned from medical with bound ribs and one eye yellowing around the edges, Kolvath told him he had been wrong. Dras deserved more, and Kolvath could have given it to him. Nkem did not dispute either statement. Instead, he said, "If you have to beat people every time somebody breaks the rules, then the rules are just you." Kolvath followed him toward the meal hall, arguing that physical enforcement could make the system stronger. Nkem disagreed. A system that only worked when the biggest prisoner was angry was not much of a system. Kolvath reminded him that he could force half the block to obey. Nkem nodded. That was precisely why he did not want it. "Because then they're obeying you." He adjusted his ribs and added, "Also, please stop offering to beat people for me. It's weird." Kolvath watched him go. For the first time in his life, he wondered whether strength could make leadership smaller. Chapter 9. Greyhook goes dark. The station lost power during third sleep. Kolvath woke to silence. Greyhook was never silent. Ventilation, pumps, door motors, lighting hum, water circulation, and distant machinery were always present. Now all of it was gone. Emergency lights came on red. Then half of them died. Someone shouted. Doors remained closed for 4 seconds. Then 3 opened at once. The cell partition between sections B and C unlocked. A maintenance door farther down the corridor slid halfway open. Another sealed completely. Alarms began. A recorded voice announced external impact damage and instructed prisoners to remain in assigned areas. The announcement cut out midway. Kolvath stood. Around him, prisoners were already moving, some toward the open door, some toward food storage, some simply because movement felt better than uncertainty. Then Nkem shouted, "Don't run through doors you didn't open." It was not a powerful voice. Kolvath's was louder, but enough people recognized it. Movement slowed. Nkem climbed onto a bench. Nkem asked whether anyone knew if the maintenance corridor still had pressure. No one did, so he told everyone to stay out until they knew. A prisoner protested that the door was open. Nkem answered that an open door did not mean there was air on the other side. That stopped more people. Kolvath moved to the doorway, not blocking it aggressively, simply occupying the space. Kolvath simply stood there, and that was enough. Nkem looked at him. Nkem asked whether Kolvath could keep people out until they knew the corridor was safe. Kolvath said yes, and Nkem nodded. "Good." Then the human did something Kolvath did not expect, nothing. For several seconds, Nkem simply looked around. Kolvath thought he was frozen. Then people began arriving. The food representative from Section A arrived first and asked what to do with meals. Nkem told him to inventory everything available outside automated storage. A medical advocate came next with word that 2 prisoners in Section D needed powered respiratory equipment. Nkem asked who knew the backup systems. When the advocate named Ural, Nkem sent someone to find him. A translator arrived with another problem. Block 9 was trying to contact 7 through the wall panel. Nkem confirmed that the translator could understand them and told her to stay on the connection. Then a former station plumber shouted that water pressure had dropped. Nkem told them to find Varnkel. Someone called back that Varn was in Block 11, so Nkem ordered the request passed through distribution. People moved. Kolvath watched. Nkem had not called a meeting or assigned new offices. Everyone already had a role, not officially but functionally. The meal representatives counted food while translators established communication. Medical advocates checked vulnerable prisoners. Work crews found tools. Block contacts began passing information through whatever channels still worked. The structure was already there. The emergency merely revealed it. A young prisoner tried to pass Kolvath at the open maintenance door and told him to move. Kolvath refused. The prisoner argued that the station was open and they could escape. Kolvath looked into the dark corridor and asked the same question Nkem had asked minutes earlier. "Escape to where?" The prisoner suggested the docking levels. Kolvath then asked whether he knew which corridors still had atmosphere, which security doors functioned, or which docks had power. The answer to every question was no. Freedom for the moment was a half-open door into systems nobody understood. Kolvath understood the temptation. Then a faint hiss came from beyond the maintenance corridor. Pressure leak. Everyone heard it. The young prisoner stepped back. Kolvath shut the half-open door manually. Not locked. Closed. Nobody tried to reopen it. Chapter 10. The station inside the prison. Greyhook's main power had failed after a debris strike damaged one of the external transfer trunks. The prison's emergency grid should have isolated the failure. It mostly did. The impact also damaged 2 distribution nodes. Several housing blocks lost local power. Security systems degraded into independent safe modes. Some doors locked, some opened, and some became useless. Guard communications fractured. Superintendent Bex appeared on the block channel 20 minutes into the outage. Her image flickered. Block 7, report. Nobody knew who she was asking until prisoners began looking at Nkem. Kolvath noticed, and so did Nkem, who looked annoyed. Nobody, a food rep shrugged. Nkem stepped to the terminal. Block 7 has emergency lighting in sections A and B, none in C and D. Water pressure is low. 2 prisoners require powered respiratory support. Maintenance corridor 3 opened during failure, but we've closed it manually. No confirmed injuries yet. Bex stared through the broken video feed. You have section counts? Nkem looked behind him. Another prisoner held up a sheet. 391 accounted for, 6 on work detail at failure. Bex's expression changed. Bex observed that they had already completed a section count. Nkem confirmed it. When she asked who had ordered the count, he turned to the prisoner holding the sheet and asked the same question. The prisoner answered, nobody. Nkem looked back at Bex. There you go. The connection crackled while the superintendent paused. Bex then reported that Block 9's medication refrigeration had failed and asked whether 7 had any cold storage capacity. Someone shouted that the food room had insulated reserve bins, while a food handler warned that the bins had no power. Nkem answered that sealed medicine could still be stored there if medical approved the temperature range. Bex nodded. I'll route medical through you. That sentence silenced the room. Through you. Kolvath watched Nkem notice it too. The human did not smile. Send instructions. The channel died, then the water stopped. Chapter 11. Pressure. Water caused panic faster than darkness. Kolvath discovered that within minutes. Drink dispensers sputtered. Sanitation systems failed. Several species required frequent hydration. Block 11 reported no pressure at all. Nkem's notebook had already listed Varn Kell as a former industrial fluid technician. Varn was in 11. Communication between 7 and 11 passed through Block 9 because 9's wall terminal still had intermittent power. A translator relayed. Varn believed a branch isolation valve had failed closed after the power loss. The valve sat inside a service junction accessible from Block 8. Block 8 could not understand Varn's technical trade dialect. Normally, a maintenance crew would solve that. Greyhook's maintenance crews were trapped behind security partitions, so the prisoners built a chain. Varn described the system. A translator in 11 converted his dialect to trade language. Block 9 passed it. 7's work registry identified another prisoner, Haldrick Sen, who had maintained agricultural pumps. Haldrick translated Varn's instructions into something physical workers could follow. Block 8 had access to the panel. The manual actuator was jammed. They needed force. When Nkem looked toward him, Kolvath smiled. At last, the crisis had produced a problem he considered simple. A machine needed more force than the others could provide. Block 8's dividing door could not fully open, but an emergency maintenance hatch between adjacent sanitation corridors still worked manually. With guard authorization over a weak comm line, Kolvath and 2 others moved through. They moved as a work crew, not an escape party or a riot. The valve housing was larger than expected. The manual wheel refused to move. A smaller prisoner tried the wheel without success. Kolvath took over. Metal groaned and the wheel moved half a degree before stopping. He adjusted his grip and pulled again, pain running through his shoulders as the wheel began to turn slowly. Another prisoner braced the housing. Kolvath turned until the indicator reached manual bypass. Somewhere in the pipes, water hammered, then flowed. A cheer came through the corridor. Kolvath leaned against the wall, breathing hard. A Block 8 prisoner stared at him. You are very strong, Kolvath nodded. Yes. The prisoner waited, perhaps expecting humility. Kolvath was Sarkin. He did not lie. Then Nkem's voice came through the relay speaker. Kolvath, pressure is back in 9 and 7, 11's still low. Kolvath straightened. What next? The question left his mouth naturally. He did not notice until after, neither did anyone else. Chapter 12. Medicine. The infirmary backup began failing an hour later. Not completely. Temperature control. Several medications required cold storage. One prisoner in Block 9 used an injected compound that degraded quickly when warm. Another in 7 required respiratory support. A third species needed regular anticoagulation medication because Greyhook's standard gravity stressed its circulatory system. Before the outage, these were private medical concerns. During the outage, they became logistical. Nkem's system already knew who needed translation and who had recurring medical dependencies. The registry did not contain diagnoses, only enough information to find the people who depended on medical support. Runners moved and names traveled. Kolvath returned to 7 to find a small prisoner collapsed near Section D. The respiratory support unit had exhausted its local battery. Medical had a portable backup on the other side of a locked partition. The guard station could open one route manually. Prisoner could not walk. Kolvath crouched. "I will carry you." The prisoner's eyes widened. Kolvath had that effect. Nkem appeared beside him. "Support the head, their neck joints aren't like ours." Kolvath looked at him. "You know?" "No, medical told us." "Good." Kolvath lifted carefully. The prisoner weighed almost nothing. He carried them through 3 dark corridors. At the partition, a guard stood behind the manual barrier. For a moment, prisoner and guard stared at one another across a powerless door. The guard released the lock. Kolvath carried the sick prisoner through. Medical staff took over. There were no threats and no negotiation. The guard looked at Kolvath. "How many more?" Kolvath checked the paper Nkem had shoved into his hand. 2 medication transfers from 9, 1 possible seizure patient from 11. The guard blinked. "You have a list." "Yes, who made it?" Kolvath almost said Nkem, then looked at the names beside each case. The entries were in different handwriting from different blocks and different species. "No one," the guard frowned. Kolvath corrected himself. "Everyone." He returned to Block 7. The phrase stayed with him. Chapter 13. The riot that didn't happen. Superintendent Bex regained partial station surveillance after 4 hours. Kolvath knew because the cameras began moving again, not all of them, but enough. Power remained unstable. Several prison sectors were connected by unlocked or manually controlled passages. Food automation was offline. Water had only partially returned. Guard staffing inside prisoner areas remained minimal. Greyhook should have been breaking apart. Kolvath had seen riots before. They followed recognizable stages: uncertainty, rumor, resource panic, status challenges, retaliation, and finally crowds. None of that vanished. There were fights. 2 food caches were stolen. 1 prisoner tried to force a maintenance hatch and was injured. Arguments erupted constantly. But the block did not become a riot. Food reps divided stored rations. The meal rotation changed because some species needed immediate access and others could safely wait. Medical runners moved. Translation relays operated by handwritten notes when terminals failed. Hazardous corridors were marked with strips torn from bedding. Work crews inspected toilets and water connections. Section counts repeated every hour. Nobody had ordered all of it. Nkem spent most of the crisis walking, not commanding, connecting. He arrived at one dispute, pointed toward a translator, then left before it finished. He redirected 2 strong prisoners toward a jammed sanitation door. He found a food rep who had been awake too long and replaced her with someone else. He reminded Block 9 that the cold storage bins were for medicine first, food second. Then he disappeared into another corridor. Kolvath finally understood why Nkem seemed to be everywhere. He was not doing the work himself. He was finding the places where the work had stopped talking to itself. Superintendent Bex's voice came over the main speaker. "Block representatives, identify." Responses began. Block 4 sent a name, then Block 5, 6, 7, 9, and 11. Then Bex asked the wrong question. "Who is coordinating prisoner activity across the affected sectors?" Silence. Kolvath looked around, so did everyone else. Then one voice came from Block 9. Block 9 answered, "Ibarra." Block 11 gave the same name, and someone in 5 simply said, "The human." 7 remained silent because Nkem was standing there. Nkem looked appalled. Kolvath began laughing, and when the human asked what was funny, Kolvath answered, "You." "I didn't do anything." That made Kolvath laugh harder. The station speaker crackled. Superintendent Beck said, "Mr. Ibarra, report to Central Liaison Terminal when available." Nkem looked toward the ceiling. Nkem looked toward the ceiling and muttered, "I hate this place." Kolvath wiped moisture from one eye and told him he was in charge. Nkem immediately denied it. Kolvath pointed out that everyone else seemed to disagree, and Nkem insisted everyone else was wrong. Kolvath leaned closer. "Different question." Nkem frowned. "What?" Kolvath shook his head. "Nothing. He would save it." Chapter 14. The shuttle. The escape opportunity appeared near the 6th hour. A service shuttle dock on the lower maintenance ring lost security isolation. Block 5 discovered the route. The shuttle itself had local power, limited life support, enough fuel for station transfer. Rumor reached 7 within minutes. Kolvath heard the plan before Nkem did. A group wanted to leave, not hundreds, perhaps 20, strong prisoners and fast prisoners who believed the station failure was the only chance they would ever get. One found Kolvath. "You can open the dock barrier." Kolvath said he might be able to open the dock barrier. The prisoner reminded him that a shuttle was waiting and said they could take it. Kolvath answered that he had already heard. Then he looked toward the dark corridor and thought of freedom. His tribunal was months away and his home system farther still. Greyhook had walls, the shuttle had engines. For 1 minute, strength and opportunity aligned perfectly. Then Nkem arrived. He looked at the prisoners gathered near the corridor. "What?" someone explained. Nkem listened. Nkem listened to the escape plan and started asking practical questions. The dock was open and pressure appeared stable, but nobody could confirm flight control, traffic control, or the external debris field. The silence after those questions did more than an argument would have. Kolvath understood before most of the others did. An unlocked shuttle was not the same thing as a safe way out. One prisoner insisted that the only destination that mattered was away. Nkem warned that if the shuttle undocked blind and struck debris, they would be away for about 30 seconds. The prisoner suggested waiting for sensors. Nkem agreed that they could, but if they had time to wait and verify the route, then this was no longer an emergency dash. "It's a plan," he said. "Make a good one." The prisoners muttered, and Nkem continued. "Also, the shuttle's on the same power branch medical wants for backup refrigeration." That changed the conversation. Kolvath stared at Nkem and asked whether he would stay even if the shuttle proved viable. Nkem looked around the damaged block. The station was not stable, he said. Kolvath pressed him because that was not the question. Nkem met his eyes, and Kolvath saw the fear plainly. The human wanted out. Of course he did. Then Nkem said, "Get the station stable." There was no declaration of honor in it, only priority. Kolvath looked toward the dock corridor, then turned away. The others noticed. Some followed immediately, others took longer. The shuttle remained docked, and its local power was rerouted through the emergency network to support medical storage. Later, Superintendent Bex learned what had happened. That would matter. At the time, Nkem simply asked whether anyone had checked Block 5's water count. Chapter 15. Power. Main power returned after 9 hours. The lights came on so suddenly several prisoners shouted. Ventilation deepened, doors reset, water pumps changed tone, and automated systems rebooted. Greyhook became a prison again. Guards entered Block 7 in full protective equipment. Kolvath expected tension, and there was some. People who had spent 9 hours moving freely through damaged barriers were now being told to return to assigned sections. They complained, but they complied. Not perfectly, though well enough. Superintendent Bex entered without armor, a choice that was either brave or calculated, and probably both. She looked first at Kolvath, naturally. He was the largest visible prisoner, with dark valve grease on one arm and someone else's dried blood across his shirt. Then a food representative walked straight past him and handed Nkem an inventory sheet. A translator followed with Block 11's final count, and Haldrick arrived to report that the water bypass needed maintenance before automatic control returned. Nkem passed the repair note to a guard, accepted a list of medical transfers, and answered a question about temporary sleeping assignments. Bex watched the traffic gather around the human before turning back to Kolvath. She confirmed Kolvath's name and asked whether he was the strongest prisoner in the block. "Probably," he said. Nkem muttered that Kolvath loved this part. Bex then looked toward the human. "And he follows you." Nkem opened his mouth to object, but Kolvath answered first. "No." Bex waited, so Kolvath thought about the water valve, the food line, the shuttle, and the sick prisoner he had carried through dark corridors. "I follow what works," he said. The human looked deeply uncomfortable. Kolvath enjoyed that. Chapter 16. Hearing. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. Greyhook administration interviewed guards, prisoners, medical staff, maintenance crews, and representatives from every affected block. Nkem appeared in administrative hearings so often that someone finally gave him a chair with his name on it. Kolvath considered this proof that Nkem had become a judge. Nkem disagreed. The central hearing took place in a secured conference room. Kolvath attended as prisoner representative for Block 7. He had not asked for that role. Everyone else had voted while he was at work detail. Nkem found this extremely funny. Superintendent Bex opened the hearing. At the central hearing, Bex summarized the contradictions instead of walking Nkem through them one yes or no answer at a time. During the outage, prisoners under his coordination had violated restrictions on cross-block movement, informal resource transfer, communication systems, and work access. The same network had prevented entry into depressurized corridors, maintained population counts, preserved medical refrigeration, and helped restore water pressure to 3 blocks. Nkem immediately objected to that last phrasing. Other people had restored the water, he said. Bex answered that they had done it through a network he helped establish. She then noted that prisoners had also gained access to an unsecured service shuttle and still made no escape attempt. Asked why, Nkem glanced toward Kolvath. Bad time? Bex's mouth moved slightly, almost amusement. Then she asked the real question. Bex then asked whether Nkem had intended to establish an alternative authority structure inside Greyhook. He said no with genuine confusion. She listed the systems anyway: food rotation, cross-species translation, medical advocacy, dispute mediation, work skill registries, and cross-block representation. Nkem answered each with the problem that had caused it. The line was terrible. People could not understand one another. Prisoners were getting sick, people were punching each other, things broke. When Bex reached cross-block representatives, Nkem sighed. That one got away from me. A few people laughed, even Bex, then she leaned forward. What did you intend? Nkem thought for several seconds. I was trying to fix lunch. Kolvath laughed first. The entire room followed. Bex covered her face with one hand. When the laughter faded, she looked at Nkem. Bex announced that Greyhook would formalize prisoner liaison councils, elected block representatives, approved language coordinators, medical advocates, food observers, voluntary work skill registries, and controlled cross-block communication. Nkem looked horrified. Bex explained that his informal systems had worked during an emergency, and formal versions could work better during normal operations. Nkem rubbed his forehead and complained that he was being punished with bureaucracy. Bex reminded him that he had created bureaucracy. I created a lunch line, Nkem protested. Apparently there was very little difference, Bex replied. Chapter 17. Release. Nkem's tribunal concluded 4 months later. He had violated the wartime exclusion zone. That remained true. The tribunal also found the route restriction had been issued after his medical cargo contract and that his ship had attempted to comply once challenged. His sentence became time served. Kolvath learned first from the block notice. He read it twice. Kolvath found Nkem near the liaison table and told him the release order had posted. Nkem had already heard. He would leave the next day. Instead of looking triumphant, the human looked around Block 7 at the laminated phrase boards, the liaison table, the approved medical advocates, and the meal rotation now built directly into the dispenser schedule. The distribution meeting still existed under an official name nobody used. Nkem stood and told Kolvath to walk with him. They moved through the block, where people stopped Nkem to congratulate him or ask questions. One complained that he was leaving before settling a bunk dispute. Nkem told them to use the liaison process. The prisoner called the process annoying. Nkem said that was how they knew it had become legitimate. At the transfer door the next morning, Kolvath stood beside Nkem and the human's single small property bag. Nkem told him he was handling food rotation. Kolvath insisted he was not in charge. Nkem called that a good answer, which only irritated him more. Kolvath accused Nkem of getting him made block representative without permission. Nkem pointed out that he had not actually voted for him. Kolvath said he had encouraged the others. Can't prove it, Nkem replied, then held out one hand. Kolvath knew the human gesture by now and took the offered hand carefully. Nkem's hand nearly disappeared inside his. Kolvath told him that he remained very weak and that Kolvath could still throw him across the room, probably farther now that the human had lost weight. Nkem knew it was not a joke. When the door opened, he stepped through, then turned once. Kolvath, don't let them ruin the meeting by making it too official. Kolvath promised, I will call it distribution. Nkem pointed at him. Exactly. The door closed. Kolvath stood alone. For the first time in months, nobody in Block 7 knew where Nkem Ibarra was. Meal rotation still began on time. Epilogue. Different question. The new prisoner arrived 3 weeks later, young and nervous and trying not to look either. Kolvath recognized the type. Everyone entered Greyhook believing they could hide fear by standing straighter. When the newcomer reached the meal hall, he saw Kolvath immediately, and his eyes widened for entirely reasonable reasons. He approached cautiously and asked whether Kolvath Dume was the strongest prisoner. Kolvath confirmed it. The young prisoner swallowed and assumed that meant Kolvath was in charge. Kolvath looked across the room instead. A Veshir medical advocate was arguing with a Sarkin food representative at the liaison table. Two translators leaned over a phrase card. A maintenance volunteer waited with a report about a leaking wash line, while three species debated tomorrow's meal order because one group needed earlier feeding. Nobody looked toward Kolvath for permission. Kolvath told the newcomer no. The young prisoner frowned. If Kolvath was the strongest, then who was in charge? Kolvath remembered a bloody human getting up from the floor because he knew he would lose the second fight too. He remembered a meal line, a wall full of words, a notebook tied together with scraps, and an open prison door nobody had run through. Then he looked toward the crowded liaison table. Different question.